Someone can ruin your entire day with a single sentence and walk away without ever knowing they did it. Hours later, you're still carrying it. You replay it in the shower. You argue back at them in the car, alone, out loud. And the person who said it forgot it before they'd even left the room. You hold on to it for days, and they don't hold on to it at all. A short reply, a certain look, a shift in someone's tone, and your whole afternoon is gone. But you've met the other kind of person too. The one who stays composed almost anywhere. New company, an unfamiliar place, a situation they've never been in before. Whatever happens around them, they stay unshaken, even-tempered, quietly in control of themselves. Someone snaps at them, and nothing moves. A message lands that would ruin anyone's evening, and their expression never changes. And if you're honest, some part of you has envied them. Somewhere underneath, you've wondered what they understand that you don't. And you tell yourself, it's simply how you're made, that you're too sensitive, and that's that. And the exhausting part is how alone it feels. Everyone else seems to let things slide right off. You're the one still holding it at midnight. You've been told your whole life that this is a flaw. Too sensitive, too intense. You take things too personally. So you've tried to care less, and it never works, because caring less was never the answer. Let me say something you may have needed to hear for a long time. There is nothing wrong with how deeply you feel. The depth is not the problem. The problem is that no one ever handed you the other half of the skill. How to feel it all, and still not be moved by it. Feeling deeply and standing steady are not opposites. The strongest people alive do both at once. That's what we're building tonight. Here's what no one told you. The calm person is not colder than you. They are not stronger by birth.
They have learned one thing you were never taught, and it can be learned. What you've been calling weakness is not weakness at all. It is an untrained skill. By the end of this, you'll have 9 of them. 9 habits that make a person almost impossible to reach. Not numb, not hard. Untouchable in the real sense. Almost impossible to knock off balance. The kind of steadiness that other people can feel the moment you walk in. And I want to be clear about one thing before we start. This is not about pretending. It's not a mask you put on and hope no one sees through. Masks crack the moment real pressure arrives. What we're building is the opposite of a mask. It's a floor under your feet that holds when the weight comes down. You won't have to perform calm. You'll actually have it. We'll take them one at a time. And I'll tell you now, the 9th one is the habit that changes how other people treat you, without you saying a single word. But it only holds once the first 8 are underneath it. So don't jump ahead. Stay with me to the end. This is where it changes. Number 1. They know exactly where they end and the world begins. Think about the last time something small threw you off. A driver cut you off. A coworker took credit for your work. Someone left you on red. In every one of those moments, you handed a stranger the keys to your mood. The Stoics had a name for the skill that prevents this. They called it the dichotomy of control. Epictetus, a man born a slave, put it plainly almost 2,000 years ago. Some things are within our power, and some things are not. Your effort, your response, your attention, yours. Other people's opinions, the outcome, the traffic, the weather, the past. Not yours, never were. The untouchable person has drawn this line so many times, it has become instinct. They don't waste an ounce of energy on what was never theirs to hold. Picture an old fortress on a hill, a citadel with high walls. The storm outside can rage all it wants. Inside the walls, the fire still burns steady. Most people live with the gates thrown open, anyone can walk in and rearrange the furniture. And here's the strange part. You don't even notice you've opened them. Someone's bad mood becomes your bad mood, and you call it empathy. A rude stranger ruins an hour you'll never get back, and you call it being a person who cares. But caring was never the problem. The open gate is. You can care about people and still not let their storm decide your weather. The Stoics were not cold men. Marcus Aurelius buried children. Epictetus lived in a body that had been broken in slavery. They felt everything. They simply refused to be governed by what they could not control. That is the whole difference. Feeling a thing and being ruled by it are not the same. The work is not to feel less. The work is to know where your walls are. Try it with something ordinary. Someone leaves you on read for a whole day. Their choice to reply is theirs, not yours. It sits outside the walls. Your evening, your worth, your calm, those are inside. Those are yours. The moment you let their silence decide your night, you've dragged their business in through your own gates. Put it back outside, not with resentment, just with a clear, quiet line. That was never mine to hold. So ask yourself, right now, about the thing weighing on you today. Which part of this is actually mine to control? And which part have I been carrying for no reason? That single question is the first brick in the wall. You'll be surprised how much of your daily weight is made of things that were never yours to carry. What someone thinks of you, whether they reply, how a decision you can't influence turns out, the mood of a stranger. None of it is in your hands, and every ounce of energy you pour into it is energy stolen from what is, your effort. Your response, the next right thing you can actually do. Pour yourself there instead. That's not giving up. That's aiming your strength at the only ground where it can land. Number 2, they know the event was never the problem. This one is subtle and it changes everything, so stay close. Something happens. You feel a wave of anger or shame or fear, and it feels like the event did that to you. Direct cause, direct effect. But between the thing that happened and the way you feel, there is a step you never see. Your judgment of it, your verdict, the private sentence you pass in a fraction of a second. Epictetus said it this way: people are disturbed not by things, but by their opinions about things. Marcus Aurelius, who wrote his private notes while running an empire, went further. If you are distressed by anything external, he wrote, the pain is not from the thing itself, but from your estimate of it. And then the part people skip. This you have the power to revoke at any moment. Read that again in your mind. The verdict is yours, which means it can be overturned. 2 people lose the same job. One is destroyed. One feels strangely free. Same event, different sentence passed on it. Think of still water. When it's calm, it reflects everything exactly as it is. Throw one stone in, and the whole picture shatters into pieces that lie to you. Most of your worst moments were not the event. They were the story you told about the event, at speed, in the dark. Notice how fast it happens. Someone doesn't text back, and within seconds you have a verdict. They're pulling away. They're angry. I did something wrong. I always do this. None of that was in the silence. You wrote all of it. The phone just went quiet. Or a boss says, "Can we talk later?" And by lunch you've been fired, demoted, and humiliated in a meeting that hasn't happened. The event was 4 words. The suffering was a full screenplay. And you were the writer, the director, and the only person sitting in the audience. This is not a character flaw. It's imagination running without a driver. The skill is not to kill the imagination. It's to remember that you're the one holding the pen. The untouchable person has learned to catch the verdict before they believe it. Not to lie to themselves, just to ask, quietly, is that actually true?
Or is that just the first thing I thought? You don't have to win an argument with your own mind. You just have to slow it down enough to watch it work. Most verdicts fall apart the second you look at them straight on. The ones that don't, the true ones, you can act on with a clear head instead of a racing one. You can even name it out loud, quietly, to yourself. That's a story, not a fact. Naming it breaks the spell. The moment you see the verdict as a verdict, it stops posing as the truth. Most people never do this. They live their whole lives believing the first sentence their mind hands them. And that first sentence, written in a flash of fear, is almost never the fair one. You are allowed to appeal it. You are allowed to ask for evidence. That isn't denial. It's refusing to be sentenced by a judge who is panicking. Either way, you've stopped being dragged by the first story that happened to show up. Keep listening. The part that matters most is coming. Number 3, they have found the gap. Something happens and you react. To most people, those two things feel glued together. The insult and the shout. The criticism and the collapse. No space between them at all. But there is a space, small and easy to miss but real. Between the thing that lands on you and the thing you do next, there is a gap. And everything you admire in a calm person lives inside that gap. They have simply learned to widen it, to step into the pause and stand there for one more second. The brain scientist Jill Bolte Taylor describes something she noticed about anger and fear. The chemical rush of an emotion, she said, moves through the body in about 90 seconds. 90 seconds. After that, the wave has physically passed. Anything still burning, you are feeding with your thoughts. Now, she drew that from her own recovery after a stroke, not from a lab. Hold it as an observation, not a law. But I've watched it work, in myself and in the people I trust most. The shape of it holds. The fury that felt permanent, if you simply wait and breathe, begins to loosen on its own. Think of a skilled chess player. The move is available. Their hand does not move. They wait. Not because they're slow, because the pause is where the power is. So the next time the heat rises in your chest, try one thing. Don't act inside the first wave. Give it the 90 seconds. Let the chemistry pass before you decide who you are. At first, this will feel almost impossible. The wave will scream that it needs an answer right now. That urgency is the emotion protecting itself. It knows that if you wait, it loses its grip on you. So it tells you that silence is weakness, that not replying is losing, that you have to defend yourself this second. None of that is true. The reply you fire off inside the first wave is almost never the one you're proud of later. Think of how many messages you'd unsend if you could. Nearly all of them were written inside those 90 seconds. The pause is not passivity. It's a person choosing to answer from the calm instead of the storm. You are always allowed to say, "Let me get back to you on that," and then actually think. There's a small ritual that makes the pause real, instead of just an idea. Take one slow breath before you answer anything that stings. One breath. That's the whole technique. It sounds almost too simple to matter. But that single breath is the doorway into the gap. In the time it takes to breathe in and out, the first wave crests and begins to fall. And you answer from the other side of it. Try it on something small first. A mildly annoying email. A little jab from someone you love. Breathe once, then respond. You'll feel the difference between a reaction and a choice, maybe for the first time. And once you felt it, you can't unfeel it. The person who can wait 1 minute longer than everyone else quietly runs the room. Take a breath here. We're halfway in, and this next habit is the thief. It quietly steals more peace from more people than any other one on this list. Hold on. What comes next is the part no one tells you. Number 4. They stopped living in a future that isn't real. Be honest about where most of your suffering actually happens. Not in the event, in the hours before it. In the version of it you rehearse at 2 in the morning. The conversation that might go wrong. The message that might come. The collapse that might arrive. You have lived through disasters that never once happened. You've paid for them in full, in advance. Seneca, who advised emperors and lost everything more than once, saw this clearly 2,000 years ago. There are more things, he wrote to his friend, likely to frighten us than there are to crush us. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Sit with that. Most of your pain is a tax you pay on events that never arrive. The mind, left alone, does not drift toward calm. It drifts toward the worst case, and then moves in and makes a home there. The untouchable person has caught the mind in the act. They notice the storm they're building, and they ask a simple question. Is this happening, or am I rehearsing? Not to pretend nothing bad ever comes. Some storms are real, and you'll meet them when they arrive. But you don't have to live the flood 100 times before the first drop falls. There's a cost to all that rehearsing that no one talks about. When the real moment finally comes, you arrive at it already worn out. You've spent your courage on 100 imaginary versions, and you have almost nothing left for the real one. The person who didn't rehearse walks in fresh, present, able to actually respond to what's in front of them. That's the quiet advantage of the composed mind. It saves its strength for what's real. And the mind cannot fight a war and find peace in the same breath. You have to choose the breath. Imagine standing on a shore, bracing every muscle for a wave that is still a mile out at sea. You'll be exhausted before the water ever reaches you, and most waves turn back before the shore. There's an old Stoic practice that sounds like the opposite of this, and it's worth clearing up. The Stoics did rehearse hardship on purpose. They pictured loss, failure, even death, calmly, in the daylight. But notice the difference. That's a deliberate, clear-eyed look at what might come, so it can't ambush you. What most of us do at 2 in the morning is nothing like that. It isn't preparation, it's panic on a loop. One makes you ready, the other just wears you out. Look at the real risk once, with a steady eye, and then set it down. So when you catch yourself deep in a scene that hasn't happened, name it. This is imagination, not reality. And come back to the only place you've ever actually lived. Now. Don't tune out yet. This next part reframes everything. Number 5. They refuse to be set on fire by other people. Someone treats you badly. Something unfair lands on you. And the heat rises fast. It feels powerful in the moment. It feels like strength. Like finally you're standing up for yourself. But watch what anger actually does. It hands the controls to the person who wronged you. Now they decide your heart rate. They decide your evening. They live in your head, rent-free for a week. The poet Horace called anger a brief madness, a short insanity that burns through your reason and leaves you holding the ash. And the ash is always yours. The other person has usually moved on. You're the one still smoldering. Marcus Aurelius, who had every power a man could have and every reason to strike back, wrote himself a quieter instruction. The best revenge, he told himself, is not to be like the one who wronged you. Read that slowly. Not revenge in the loud sense, the deeper win. When someone is cruel and you stay composed, you have not lost the exchange. You have won something they can't touch. You have refused to be remade in their image. You stayed yourself while they lost themselves. Think of a blade being sharpened or a spring held under tension. Quiet, contained, and far stronger than anyone who lashes out. This does not mean you swallow everything and call it peace. Composure is not the same as being a doormat. You can set a hard boundary in a level voice. In fact, the level voice is what makes it land. The person who yells has lost. The person who states the line calmly and holds it has already won. There's a test you can run in any tense moment. Just ask, who is in control of me right now? If your pulse is climbing because of what someone else did, then they are driving, not you. And the goal is never to pretend you feel nothing. Pretending is just a slower leak. The goal is to feel the anger, let it move through you, and still choose your next move from a clear place. Anger visits everyone. The untouchable person simply refuses to sign the lease. They let it pass through like weather. They don't build a house inside it. Because the moment you act from the fire, you've already handed the wind to the person who lit it. So the next time someone tries to hand you their fire, don't take it. Let them burn alone. Stay cool, stay clear, and stay exactly who you were before they walked in. And don't mistake this for becoming passive. Somewhere along the way, calm got confused with weak, and that's a lie. The strongest person in a room is almost never the loudest. It's the one who doesn't need to raise their voice to be heard. A quiet no, held firmly, ends more than a shouted one. A steady question lands harder than an insult. The person still yelling is telling you they've lost control. The person still calm is telling you they never did. Give me a few more minutes, and you'll see where this leads. Number 6. They understand that you become what you repeat. Here is the uncomfortable part. Composure is not a mood you find. It's a groove you wear into yourself. Every time you react on impulse, you make that path a little deeper, easier to fall into next time. And every time you pause and choose your response, you carve a different path, also deeper, also easier next time. You are always training something. The only question is, which one? Marcus Aurelius wrote a line that reaches straight into this. The soul, he said, becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Not once, in a single dramatic decision. Slowly, thought by thought. The way cloth takes color from being soaked again and again. Modern psychology gives this an edge. Daniel Goleman described what he called an amygdala hijack. It's the moment the emotional brain seizes control before the thinking brain can even arrive. The flash of rage before the reason. You can't delete that wiring, but you can train the gap we talked about until the pause comes faster than the flare. That's what practice actually is. Not becoming a person who never feels the heat. Becoming a person whose first instinct, worn in over years, is to breathe before they burn. Think of water falling on stone. One drop does nothing. You'd laugh if someone told you it could carve rock. But the same drop, in the same place, for years, cuts a channel through solid stone. Quiet repetition beats brute force every time. Your calm will not arrive as a lightning bolt one perfect morning. It's built in the small, unseen reps. The reply you didn't send. The breath you took first. The argument you walked away from with your dignity still on. No one claps for those. No one sees them. That's exactly why they change you. This is why waiting to feel ready is a trap. You don't think your way into composure. You practice your way in. The first few times you hold your tongue, it will feel like you're losing, like you swallowed something you should have said. Sit with that discomfort. It won't feel good, and I won't pretend it does. That's a new groove being cut against the pull of the old one. Give it a month of small reps, and the pause that felt impossible starts to feel natural. Give it a year, and people start describing you with a word you never used to hear. Steady, grounded, unbothered. You didn't change your personality. You changed what you rehearse. And here's the mercy in it. You don't have to get it right every time. You'll still snap. You'll still send the message you regret. You'll still lose the thread on a bad day. The
The groove doesn't come from perfect reps. It comes from more reps landing on the calm side than the other, over time. Miss one, and you haven't failed. You've just got the next rep waiting. No one becomes unshakable by never shaking. They become it by returning to steady a little faster each time they're knocked off it. You are not looking for one big moment of strength. You are wearing a groove, one quiet choice at a time. Number 7, they let their silence do the heavy lifting. Watch an insecure person in a tense moment. They over-explain, they justify, they fill every gap with words. They need you to understand, to agree, to approve, and all that noise leaks their power out through the cracks. Now watch someone genuinely composed. They say less. They let a question sit. They're comfortable in a silence that makes others squirm. To them, silence isn't emptiness. It's the sound of a person who doesn't need your reaction to feel whole. You don't owe everyone an explanation. You don't have to defend every choice at the moment it's questioned. Half of what drains you is the compulsion to be understood by people who have already decided not to understand. Let them misread you for a while. The right ones catch up. The wrong ones were never going to. Think of a lighthouse. It does not chase the ships. It does not run down the coast explaining itself. It stands in one place and holds its light. And everything that needs it finds its way by that steadiness. You will never convince the ones who've already decided against you. And you don't need to. Let the light do what the noise never could. The most powerful thing you can do in a heated moment is often nothing at all. A pause, a steady look, a calm word, and then quiet. Let the silence carry the weight your words would only cheapen. The loud ones are trying to convince the room. The composed ones already know, and the room can feel the difference. This is the hardest one for most people, and I'll tell you why. Silence feels like danger when you've spent your life proving yourself. If no one's clapping, if no one's agreeing, the old fear whispers that you're being rejected. So you fill the air. You explain one more time. You chase the approval right out the door. But every word spent chasing it tells the other person you don't quite have it yourself. Confidence is quiet because it isn't asking for anything. It already holds what it needs. Try it once.
Say your piece and then stop. Let the silence sit there and do the work. It's louder than you think. There's a quiet power in being a little bit unreadable. When you don't rush to fill every silence, people lean in. They pay closer attention. They start to wonder what you're thinking instead of being handed it. The person who explains everything gives away all their weight. There's nothing left to wonder about. The person who says one true thing and lets it sit keeps their balance. That isn't a game, and it isn't coldness. It's trusting that what you said was enough. Say it once clearly and let it stand on its own feet. Number 8, they carry their calm with them. Most people are waiting for the world to go quiet before they'll let themselves feel steady. When things settle down, when this project ends, when that person finally leaves, then I'll have some peace. But the world never fully goes quiet. There's always another wave. Another deadline, another difficult person, another bill. If your calm depends on your circumstances, then your calm is never really yours. It's on loan, and the world can call it back anytime it likes. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this while surrounded by war, politics, and the whole weight of an empire. People look for retreats, he wrote. The countryside, the coast, the hills. And then he catches himself. But this is the mark of a very ordinary mind, because you can retreat into yourself any hour you choose. Nowhere, he says, is more peaceful or more free of interruption than a person's own soul. Sit with that for a second. The calm you keep chasing in a vacation, a quiet house, a perfect morning, you can step into in a single breath, right now, in the middle of the noise. Not because the noise stopped, because you stopped needing it to. The untouchable person has built a room inside themselves that no one else holds a key to. They can step into it in a crowded office, in a hard conversation,
in traffic, in the worst week of the year. Think of the eye of a storm. The winds are screaming in every direction, and at the center, there is a column of perfect stillness. You are not trying to stop the storm. You're learning to stand in the eye of it. That's the difference between peace that depends on the world and peace that travels with you. One is always at the mercy of the next thing that happens. The other is yours to enter, at will, for the rest of your life. So stop waiting for conditions to be perfect before you let yourself be calm. The retreat was never out there. It was a door inside you that you forgot you could open. Step through it now. Number 9. They stopped living by a verdict that was never theirs to obey. Here's a strange thing about being human. You are the one person you can never get away from. You live inside your own head every second of your life.
And yet, whose opinion of you do you trust the least? Your own. You'll take a stranger's offhand comment over your own steady sense of who you are. Marcus Aurelius noticed the same thing, and it clearly puzzled him. "It never ceases to amaze me," he wrote, "that we all love ourselves more than other people, yet care more about their opinion of us than our own." Read that twice. You care more about the verdict of people who barely know you than the one passed by the person who has been with you your entire life. You. Think how much of your day is spent performing for an audience that isn't even watching. The comment you rehearse, the outfit you second guess, the choice you put off because of what someone might think. And most of those people are far too busy performing for their own invisible audience to spend much time judging yours. The untouchable person has quietly taken back the gavel. They still listen to good counsel. They're not arrogant, and they're not deaf to the people who love them. But the final verdict on their life, they pass themselves. They stopped outsourcing it to the crowd. Think of a judge in a courtroom. The gallery can shout and groan and boo all at once. The judge waits for the noise to die down and rules anyway. You are the judge of your own life. You've just been letting the gallery run the room. A person who needs the whole crowd's approval can be controlled by anyone willing to withhold it. A person who has made honest peace with their own verdict cannot be bought that way at all. So take the gavel back, hear them out, and then decide for yourself. That ruling was always yours to make. And notice what happens to the people who used to move you so easily. They lose their grip, not because you fought them, but because you stopped handing them the rope. The one who needed your reaction has nothing left to pull on. You've gone still inside, and there's nothing there for them to grab. That's what untouchable actually looks like from the outside. Not cold, not armored, just no longer available to be jerked around. People feel it before they can name it, and they start to treat you differently, almost without deciding to. So let's bring these home, because underneath all 9, there is one thing. You drew the line between what's yours and what isn't. You caught the verdict before you believed it. You found the gap and learned to stand in it. You stopped bleeding for a future that hasn't come. You refused to be set on fire by other people. You started wearing the groove of the person you want to be. And you let your silence do what your panic never could. You learned to carry your calm with you instead of waiting for the world to hand it over. And you took back the final verdict on your own life. None of this makes you cold. That's the real fear, isn't it? That if you stop reacting, you'll stop caring. It doesn't work that way. The numb person feels nothing. The composed person feels everything and still keeps their feet. You will still love hard. You'll still be moved by what deserves to move you. A piece of music, a person, a moment that earns your tears. What changes is that the small things stop running your life. The rude email, the slow driver, the look that used to cost you a whole day. You get those days back. You get your evenings back. You get to spend your feeling on what's worth it instead of leaking it to every stranger with a bad mood. That is not a smaller life. It's a much larger one. And none of this lands all at once. You won't wake up tomorrow untouchable. You'll practice one of these, forget the other 8, and catch yourself halfway into an old reaction. That's fine. That's the work. You're not trying to turn to stone. You're trying to be a little harder to knock over this month than you were last. So pick one of the 9, just one for this week. The one that landed hardest while you listened. Live that single habit until it stops costing you effort. Then come back for the next. This is a path, not a switch. Every one of these points the same direction, back toward you. Back toward the part of you that was never actually up for grabs. Here's the thing about being untouchable. It was never about building higher walls against the world. It's about finally seeing that the center of you was always behind the walls to begin with. No one can reach your peace unless you carry it out to them and hand it over. You have done that for years. Handed it over to people who didn't ask for it and won't remember taking it. That's the habit that ends here. Not feeling less, just stopping the handoff. Their reaction was never your master. The tone in that email was never your master. The stranger's mood was never yours to carry. You are the fortress and the fire inside it, both, and the gates have always been yours to close. For years you've been leaving them open and calling it kindness, or calling it love, or just not knowing there was another way. Now you know, and knowing is the moment the choice quietly becomes yours again. You don't have to close them to everyone. You just have to be the one who decides. That's all untouchable ever meant. Not a wall against the world, a hand on your own gate. None of this asks you to shut people out. The gate can stand wide open for the ones who've earned it. What changes is that you're the one standing at it, not the stranger, not the tone of a message, not the mood of a room. You decide what crosses in and touches the fire, and what stays outside where it belongs. That's the whole of it. Not a colder heart, a steadier hand on your own gate. And a steady hand, once you felt it, is very hard to give back. So the next time the world comes to move you, let it come. Feel it fully and stay standing. That stillness other people feel when you walk in, it isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, one quiet choice at a time, until being unshaken is simply who you are. If you made it here, you already have more of this in you than you think. Now you know its name. Here, on The Quiet Power, we come back to this same idea from 100 angles, because it's the work of a lifetime, not an afternoon. If one line in this reached you tonight, leave a single word below. Composed, just so I know it landed. And if this is the voice you've been looking for, stay with us. There's more of this path ahead, and it's quieter and stronger the further in you go. Take a slow breath, unclench your jaw, drop your shoulders. Nothing out there has to move you tonight. Power begins where the noise ends,